Gilbert Dent, living his quiet life. But everything changes when he catches a glimpse of her. Every evening as dusk fell, Gilbert would walk past an old crumbling house on Wood Lane. He hadn't thought much of it at first, just another decaying building, forgotten by time. But then, he noticed her. A woman, sitting by the window, watching. Her face was hidden in shadow. He couldn't see her clearly, but her eyes. Those eyes. Lifeless, hollow, and deep, like she was staring right into his soul. It was as if she was waiting for him. And, for reasons he couldn't understand, his heart began to race every time he saw her. It was the same thing, night after night. That same window. That same haunting gaze. He felt like he was going mad. What was it about her? The mystery tormented him. His thoughts were consumed by her. Was she real? Was she some kind of ghost? Then, one evening, there was no woman at the window. She was gone. Gilbert froze. His pulse shot through his chest. Where was she? The next morning, Gilbert couldn't stand it. His unease turned into obsession. He had to know. He had to see if she is real or his illusion. On his way, his heart pounding with dread and anticipation. When he reached the house, there was no one. The place was completely destroyed. Walls crumbling. Windows shattered. And furniture overturned. Dust covered every surface. And the air smelled of fungus and decay. The house was eerily silent, as if it had been abandoned for decades. A sudden wave of fear swept over him. Gilbert's chest tightened, and his breaths became shallow. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the air grew heavy, suffocating him. Something was horribly wrong. Without thinking, he turned and ran, his footsteps echoing in the dark as he fled from the house. One afternoon, he couldn't shake the feeling of something watching him. Something waiting and calling him. So, he went back. Back to that house, alone. The air felt thick. The house, suffocating. The gate creaked open with a groan, the hinges whispering like they hadn't been touched in years. Gilbert climbed the steps, 5 steps to the door. But then, he turned. Something drew him. There, beneath the window, was a small, round table. It looked familiar. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He couldn't look away. And then, he saw it. A hand. A delicate, pale hand, lifeless. Its fingers gripped the edge of the table. And, as Gilbert's eyes moved upward, his blood ran cold. There she was, but not how he expected. She was lying there, twisted and still, her face frozen in pain. Her eyes were wide, staring up, as if she had seen something terrifying. She was dead. Gilbert took a step back, his legs shaking and his head spinning. The woman in the window wasn't just a stranger, she was a victim. She had been murdered. Gilbert rushed to the police. They broke into the house together, a policeman leading the way. The house was cold, empty. The only sounds were their own footsteps and the occasional creak of the floorboards. It felt like something watched them. When the officer lit the torch, he moved toward the window. Gilbert's stomach turned. He couldn't bear it. But as the light hit the window, the officer stopped in his tracks. There was no body. The woman, she was gone. The window was empty, same for the old table. No sign of a murder. No blood. No trace of her at all. It was as if she had never been there. The officer turned to Gilbert, eyes narrowed in suspicion. Officer, in frustration, said, "This house, it's been empty for years. No one's lived here. No one ever stays. There's whispers, rumors of something dark, something wrong. But there's no woman. Never has been." The officer dismissed him, saying the house had been abandoned for years, just a place of dark rumors. Gilbert couldn't comprehend it. Had he imagined her? No, he hadn't. That night, Gilbert couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling. The image of her face burned into his mind. He couldn't forget her. He couldn't forget the way she looked at him, as if she knew him. As if she was waiting for something. Days passed, and Gilbert's obsession grew. He told his brother, Ned, a doctor, about what had happened. But Ned wasn't convinced. He chalked it up to stress, fatigue. But Gilbert, desperate, insisted it was real. He was sure. In an effort to ease Gilbert's tormented mind, they went to Brighton, hoping the fresh sea air and a change of surroundings would help Gilbert escape his hallucination. Ned thought the distance from that eerie house might bring clarity to his brother's troubled mind. One evening, as they walked along the cliffs, the sound of crashing waves and the cool sea breeze seemed to work. Gilbert appeared calmer, but the tired look in his eyes said otherwise. Without warning, Gilbert froze. His breathing turned rapid, and his white eyes locked on the horizon. He raised a shaking hand, pointing. He shouted with breaking voice, "There! She's here! Look, right there! Don't you see her?" Ned turned quickly, scanning the cliffs. All he could see was the fading light of the sunset and the vast empty sea. Ned said with a steady voice, "Gilbert, there's no one here. You're just imagining it. Try to calm down." Gilbert is in panic. With shaking voice, he said, "She's calling me. I feel her. She's been following me ever since that house. I can't get away from her." Ned gripped his shoulders firmly, forcing him to look him in the eye. "Gilbert, listen to me. There is no woman. This isn't real. You're letting this illusion control you. There's no woman." Gilbert's wild eyes softened for a moment, as if trying to understand. Then, he shook his head slowly. He whispered, "You don't understand. She's real. She's inside me, pulling me toward her. It's like I'm not even in control anymore." Ned's voice turned gentle, though his worry was clear. "Gilbert, you've been under a lot of stress. You need rest. Let me help you. We'll get through this together." Ned gently guided Gilbert away from the cliff's edge, making sure he didn't stumble. But Gilbert's eyes didn't leave the spot where he was convinced he had seen her. Ned quietly led his brother back to the hotel, hoping that some rest would help him find peace, and Gilbert might feel a little more ease. Later, as Gilbert slept, Ned went out for a walk. He came back to the hotel, but Gilbert was gone. Panic surged through him. Ned felt a chill of fear at the thought that Gilbert might have returned to the old haunted house. But why would he go back? He had sworn never to return. Maybe he wanted to uncover the truth behind the strange events tied to the house, or believed he could face whatever haunted it. Or perhaps the woman had drawn him back to her shadowy presence lingering in his mind, impossible to forget. He rushed back to the house, the old, forgotten house. The air was dense. The wind howled, making the house seem alive, groaning and creaking. As Ned stepped inside, he struck a match. The room was dark, suffocating. The walls, covered in decaying paper, seemed to move. And then, he saw it. There by the window, Ned saw Gilbert sitting. As he approached, he saw his brother's lifeless body, lying still, cold, unmoving. His hand was still clutching the same table the woman had touched, just as if nothing had changed. Gilbert's face was locked in a terrifying expression. Eyes wide in shock, his mouth twisted in a silent scream. Ned was torn between disbelief and fear. Gilbert appeared to have taken his own life with a knife, but the way he gripped the table, as if frozen in place, made Ned hesitate. But what really sent a chill down Ned's spine were the marks on Gilbert's neck. Small, delicate indents, as if someone had gripped him with incredible force. Someone had murdered him. It was unmistakable. Her fingers had left their mark. She had taken him, just like she had taken the others. It didn't feel right. Something wasn't adding up. The marks on Gilbert's skin were undeniable, etched deep into his flesh. The police would never look further. They would label it as suicide and close the case. The truth would remain hidden, swallowed by the silence of this old house. The story would fade, and the house would continue to rot in the shadows, forgotten by all. But sometimes, if you walk by that house late at night and look up at the window, you might see her. Still there. Still watching. And if you do, you better run. Because she's not just looking at you. She's waiting to pull you in. Just like she did with him. And when you hear the wind howling, the door creaking on its hinges, don't look back. Don't turn around. Because the phantom woman is already closer than you think.